Hello and welcome to Jaw Law. I'm your host, Joe McGregor from the law firm of McGregor and Oblad based in Dallas, Texas. And today we are going to be talking about employee loyalty. Any material communicated on this podcast is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. Nothing herein should be considered to create an attorney-client relationship. Please consult an attorney for legal advice on your matter. All right, so today, before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Again, we say this every time, but if you like what you're hearing, please like, review, share, help it get to more of your colleagues so that they can be helped as well. I know it's cliche, but it really does help us, and it allows us to be able to help more dentists out there. Next, I want to go ahead and pitch our next dental practice launch seminar, which is going to be January 17th, which is a far ways off, but I'm giving super advance notice so that you can register and make plans. So if you're coming in from out of town, this can be easy on you. The way you register is going to our website, which is jawlawpodcast.com, and you'll find the link there. And the Dental Practice Launch Seminar is intended to be an opportunity for you to meet with not just us, but several of our colleagues in an environment where you can ask any question and you are promised flat out extreme honesty. They're not there to sell you. They're there to answer your questions in an honest manner, even when the answer may conflict with their personal interests. It's not the dog and pony show that we often will see. This is meant to be just an information-packed session and one where you'll have opportunities to be one-on-one with a legitimate dental industry expert. The cost is free, so it doesn't cost you anything as long as you can get here. The seats are limited, so make sure you register in advance. All right, so today we're going to talk about employee loyalty, but in one specific regard. A couple of weeks ago, we were helping a client purchase a practice, and that practice had a couple of employees that had been there a very long time. I want to say one of them had been there like 27 years, another one 22, another one 4, like basically all but one employee. Like the shortest duration was 14 years. One employee was relatively new, like a front desk receptionist. And it was certainly positioned by the broker in this deal that the longevity of the employees was a plus. And my client and I, we talked about whether or not this was true. Remember, we've been doing this for quite a while. And over the years, we have developed some thoughts about employee loyalty/longevity. And as usual, I have a few caveats. Number one, every practice is different. And why is every practice different? Well, it has different employees and different patients. Some employees are a great matchup for that particular patient pool, and some are not. Some employees are great together and others are not. These are obvious things, right? But I think we forget them sometimes. So for instance, you can have a super cheery person that maybe the patients love, but the employees are like, that's just too much. You need to tone it down. You can also have an employee, maybe you have a hygienist who's very, very good at his or her job, but maybe doesn't get along with the other staffers. All I'm saying is that it's complicated, right? This is calculus. It's not math. And being able to offer blanket advice, it's just not a good idea. But within that context, when we're talking about employee longevity, knowing that, yeah, sure, often that can mean very great things. And in fact, probably does mean that those employees have great relationships and long-standing relationships with the patient base. If someone's been there 3 decades or almost, of course, they've watched people grow up. That is going to be an asset. And the fact that, like in this case, where I think it was 3 employees who had worked, just like almost 15 years of 3 of the same employees at the practice, they've got a system down, right? I don't want to undersell that. There are pros. What I also want to mention, though, is this is something that came up, there are also cons. Number one, it seems to be the case, and obviously this isn't like some scientific study or anything, but it is our observation, consistent observation, that when someone has been there a very long time, their pay starts to outpace the marketplace. We sometimes see people who are getting paid as much as twice as what we would expect someone in that role to get paid. There's this idea out there that you should get a raise every year. And certainly I'm not opposed to paying people more and rewarding your staff. And I'm not even opposed to paying your staff a premium because honestly, dealing with turnover is not very fun. I guess my point is in the first couple of years of doing that, sure. But if you've done that for the last 27 years, you could imagine that somebody who maybe is a $45,000 a year employee who's now a $72,000 employee, and it's really hard to justify this particular employee at 72,000. Well, that's what happens. The longer someone is there, the more likely that is going to be the case. It is not, however, a rule. I sometimes get really surprised. Somebody got hired in like 1994 and has only had one pay raise in the intervening years. That does happen. And you can look like the hero when you show up and give them a massive pay raise. And the massive pay raise is just bringing them up to what the market pays. But that's just one of the issues. One of the other issues is actually a consistent realization that those employees are not up to speed with training. So they are going to be less likely to be in tune and trained on the most recent technology, most recent practices, including best practices. And obviously, this is not going to be a rule. You're going to have practice owners, sellers who did a great job. But it is our case when Matilda is 68 years old and she's worked there since she was 28. I mean, you tell me what the odds of her understanding back and forth in and out of your software program, your management software program. It's just not as likely, right? And I know that's probably, maybe that's ageist of me, but that's something we see. And by the way, where do I get this information? The information is not when we're buying the practice. It's the phone calls that we get 6 months later, 1 year later, or 6 weeks later. Somebody calls up and says, Joe, remember that practice that we bought? And I was thrilled that Matilda had worked there for 27 years. By the way, Matilda's made up. That's not her, this one lady's real name. And they'll say, Joe, it turns out that she doesn't even know how to use Microsoft Word. She can barely send an email. I got to get rid of her. So it's not a rule. And sometimes we're surprised. But yes, it is the case that people who have been there a long time, especially in this generation, can sometimes be less trained on technology and how to do things, basic things sometimes. But usually they'll have some kind of superficial understanding of how to function within some program, but not a deep one, and maybe not one where somebody who's recently been trained or went to school for that they'll have a better understanding. And so the question becomes, do you stick with this person who may not know how to use your management software very well, or do you go with somebody who, for the same price or possibly like 30% lower, can fully maximize that program or just get way more out of it? And that's a business decision that you'll have to make. The final point I want to make is it is our experience. Again, these are the calls we get 6 months later. But when you try to change a program and they just can't do it, Dolly doesn't understand how voice over IP phones work, and someone else doesn't understand the switch. These are people who have existed. They've been comfortable. And maybe that's where I want to take this, is that you have people who have been comfortable. You don't last in a practice for 20 years when you're uncomfortable, when you hate going every day. Those are the people who have not been asked to do new things and not been asked by a new face to do new things. So when you take over, You are disruptive. Even when you're nice, even when it's the right decision, you are necessarily disrupting what they're comfortable with. And this is something you need to think about. You need to think about it, especially in terms of who you are and whether you're able to engage with them in a way that's not as threatening. But it is the case, and kind of the point of this episode is we have seen people who have been there a long time. They're very comfortable with what's going on. And when you show up, sometimes these people have been in the practice longer than you've been alive, and you're going to change their world. They don't take it well. Doesn't mean they won't take it well. Certainly, again, this is not a rule. This is just what we consistently see. Now, what are we saying? Honestly, we love longevity. We love this loyalty because it does tend to provide a layer of stability when we take over. The problems that we see are when you try to take over and put your own fingerprints on the practice, change the operating software, update procedures, enforce compliance. And when you don't have a great relationship with one of them, sometimes you got to be a leader and you've got to remove one. What does that do to everyone else, right? You've been there 8 months. They've been there 18 years. How is that going to look? How is that going to be received? Are they going to accept you as the new leader? So yes, longevity can be a wonderful thing, but you have to be honest with yourself and understand the other edge of that sword. It's both a good and a bad thing. And are you prepared to deal with the sharp end of that sword where you may have to make some decisions that are difficult and will have repercussions that you may not necessarily understand and be able to plan for? It's just something to think about when you encounter your next acquisition. It's something else to think about when you're looking at those employees. Okay, that's all we have today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.